Showers still around this evening, but for many they'll tend to fade. We'll keep some going in northern Scotland, a few for the north of Northern Ireland, northern parts of Wales, northwest England, but elsewhere many areas dry and clear, and the wind's easing a touch overnight, which is why those temperatures will tumble down to 4 or 5 degrees in towns and cities, but rural spots, particularly in the northern half of the UK, likely to be close to or a little bit below freezing to start Thursday. So yes, a chill in the air tomorrow morning, and there will still be showers in the air as well coming in across northern Scotland. Still a fairly brisk wind, but not as lively and not as gusty as the winds have been through the day today. Those breezes will bring a few showers across the northern parts of Northern Ireland, plenty packing in across Wales, although the south coast probably dry, and a good part of England having a dry, fine and sunny start to Thursday, albeit with that chill in the air. Now, as we go through the day, we'll see the clouds bubbling up a little bit, but I don't think we'll see as many showers as we've seen through the course of today. It's still plenty for Wales and a few more coming into southwest England and across northern Scotland, but much of southern Scotland dry, and large parts of eastern England and the Midlands also staying dry and dodging the showers with some sunny spells. But despite a bit of sunshine, temperatures on the chilly side. Similar values to today, but at least the winds tomorrow will be a little lighter. Lighter still on Friday, and even again likely to see more of a frost on Friday morning. Much of the country, though, will be dry and fine on Friday. We will see rain coming into the northwest. The wind's picking up here as well. That's a sign of a change. Things turning wetter across the north into the weekend, staying dry in the south and slowly warming up.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You command. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday,
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. As Port Talbot steelworkers brace themselves for 2,500 redundancies and 300 coming later, the government has announced £500 million in subsidies. But surely the only solution to save our steel is to stop net zero. In more evidence that the Labour honeymoon period ended before it even began, the government has scuppered the strongest economic growth in the G7. It was bequeathed by the Tories, but now the economy stalls for the second month in a row. And speaking of destroying the economy, as Labour presses on with the renters' reform bill, landlords are already warning this will push up rents by as much as 10%. Plus, the King's first return to Australia as the monarch has already prompted questions about cultural sensitivities after Buckingham Palace bizarrely drops the word walkabout to avoid offence. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my panel, historian and broadcaster David Oldroyd-Bolt and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. As ever, let me know your views. It's a crucial part of the programme. Mailmog at gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines. The Foreign Secretary has announced over £600 million worth of support for Ukraine, while the US Secretary of State has announced $700 million dollars. David Lammy and Antony Blinken have been in Kyiv today on a joint trip, calling it a critical moment in the war with Russia. Their visit follows reports that Joe Biden will lift a ban on British Storm Shadow missiles being used on Russian territory after Iran supplied ballistic missiles to Russia. Back in the UK, Labour is facing mounting pressure from within its own ranks to reverse cuts to the winter fuel payment. In today's exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak pushed the Keir Starmer for details on the impacts of the cuts, which will see 10 million pensioners lose the payment. Despite the opposition, the Prime Minister insists it's necessary to fix the £22 billion financial shortfall. Meanwhile, this morning, our political editor, Chris Hope, asked the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, if the looming October budget will be more bad news for pensioners.
We've committed to those bus passes, to free TV licences for those entitled and free prescriptions. But we've also committed to the triple lock, not just for 1 year, but for the duration of this Parliament. And that means that pensions will continue to rise by whichever is higher, 2.5% inflation or average earnings. That means that pensioners have £900 more this winter and likely another £460 from next April.
Meanwhile, the Business Secretary has unveiled a multi-million-pound package to support Tata Steel's shift to greener production. Jonathan Reynolds blamed the previous government for failing to make critical decisions. However, the Conservatives are accusing Labour of extending a deal they once criticised. Jonathan Reynolds says the new agreement includes investment opportunities to secure long-term jobs, despite up to 2,800 positions being at risk. And no-fault evictions could soon be history as the government prepares to ban Section 21 evictions. The Renters' Rights Bill, set to be introduced today, promises sweeping changes to protect England's 11 million renters. It will also force private landlords to take faster action on unsafe housing conditions. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner says the bill will overhaul renting and tackle unfair practices, but landlords warn the reforms must be fair to both sides. Those are your latest headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Earlier today, the government announced a £500 million subsidy package for the Port Talbot-based Tata Steel, hailing the agreement as a new and improved deal for the company. The money will go towards funding a greener electric furnace in place of the current blast furnace, which will be closed. This closure will lead to around 2,500 workers being made redundant in the short term and up to 300 more expected to lose their jobs later. The new technology will not be able to make new steel. Rather, it will melt down and refashion scrap steel and iron. The Tata Steel crisis set alight 5 years ago when the company, a huge employer and manufacturer in both Wales and the northeast of England, announced plans to sell its UK business, leading bosses and many political representatives to lobby for a buyout to save the company, culminating in the £500 million payout that we have seen today. But why was this crisis ever able to happen in the first place? Well, the answer is quite simple. Years of escalating interventionist and stifling green and environmental regulations being imposed upon manufacturers has hindered Britain's ability to make things, to be energy self-sufficient and economical. In the House of Commons, Reform UK Deputy Leader Richard Tice raised this issue.
The truth is, and the country needs to know this, that the thousands of jobs and the loss of these blast furnaces announced today is because of both main parties' obsession with net zero. Blast furnaces have been losing money because of high energy costs caused by the very expensive renewable energy.
To which the Minister, Jonathan Reynolds, responded,
I have to tell the honourable member that I'm afraid he's misinformed as to what this is. There are issues around the competitive cost of industrial electricity in the UK. They are, in many ways, they are not the issues the honourable member is saying.
Labour is in denial. It is more devoted to sacrificing jobs on the altar of net zero than it is to ensuring economic prosperity. In Britain, along with the EU, we have adopted the most aggressive green agenda and policies in the world, and the damage we are doing to our economies has been significant. The potential for further economic damage is catastrophic. A groundbreaking report from former European Central Bank chief Mario Draghi, published this week, has issued stark warnings on the potential future of productivity within Europe if investment in manufacturing is not prioritised with urgency. Mr. Draghi warned European leaders that they would be forced to choose between climate, economic and foreign policy goals if the EU fails to drive forward productivity. In Britain, we must also heed these warnings. Manufacturing is an essential component of economic prosperity, and protecting inefficient, high-cost energy manufacturing, carbon border adjustment mechanism tariffs, which will make goods more and more expensive and add to our economic inefficiency. In truth, the incompatibility of the radical green agenda and prosperity and happiness has never been clearer. It is absolute folly. We are losing jobs because of a green obsession, because we put imposts on energy, which we then pay taxpayers money to countermand through subsidies. It is industrial policy stood on its head. As ever, let me know your views by email, mailmog@gbnews.com. Now, I'm particularly pleased to be joined this evening by former Conservative MP Sir John Redwood and somebody who understands these issues better than almost anybody else. John, thank you so much for coming in. I was briefly Energy Secretary and Business Secretary and was dealing with this issue with Tata and indeed with China Steel and Scunthorpe. And it was the most infuriating thing that the Treasury puts charges on energy, which then mean BEIS and its successor goes to the Treasury to ask for subsidies to make up for the charges that are bankrupting the industries that we're then subsidising.
And you still lose the jobs and you lose the basic capacity. I mean, you're absolutely right. Very powerful statement you just made. I fully endorse everything you said. And I know you were challenging it when you were briefly in that department. It's a pity they didn't let you do the job for longer and get it sorted out. But what we have today is Labour pretending they've renegotiated a deal which is just as bad as the Conservative one on its principles. It means the end of blast furnace steelmaking, basic steelmaking in South Wales. They will follow that up with an even worse deal on Scunthorpe, and then this country won't be able to make any new steel at all, the only serious advanced country that can't. Thousands of jobs going, and no hope of getting that industry back. It's a disgrace.
Now, I suppose you could argue that this type of manufacturing can be more cheaply done in other parts of the world, and that we are an open global economy. And if there is a competitive advantage in making steel in China, we should import from them. Do you accept that argument?
No, I don't, because if you look at the cost structures of steel, it's practically all energy cost and capital cost. It's not people. Modern steel works don't have anything like the same number of people as they had before. And our problem is not the labour cost. Our problem is the massive expenditure on energy, which is to a great extent caused by both rigged high prices to help renewables and by all the extra taxes and carbon trading and carbon costs imposed on top. And that is what Draghi has made very clear, because we've got very similar systems to the European one. Until recently, ours was entirely the European one. And if anything, we've made it worse rather than better, and we should be reforming it. And Draghi says this is killing industry. All the heavy energy industries in Europe are at threat and risk of this kind of closure. And he is desperately pleading with them. But of course, he's part of the problem, because he favoured all this green investment and making green investment the cornerstone of the EU policy.
And indeed, that's the argument of the Labour government, which, as I understand it, is that we should be at the forefront of green investment, we should lead by example, and that the future opportunity for our economy is as a green leading economy, and Europe proposing the same. What chance do you think there is of that happening?
Well, very little, because, yes, it will create quite a lot of jobs, but in China has played a blinder, and she's got far ahead of Europe and of America. And she is the producer of the solar panels and a lot of the wind turbines and certainly of the batteries, and she's got access to a lot of the raw materials and smelts and makes a lot of the raw materials you need for green products. And so again, Draghi makes this very cruel choice very clear in his document, where he basically says, if we want to accelerate to net zero, we've got to import an awful lot of it from China, and then we don't get the green jobs we've been promising everybody.
And it's really interesting that Draghi, of all people, is saying it, because he is an instrumental part of the European project. The net zero ambition has become fundamental to the European project. The European economies are way ahead of other economies in decarbonising. Is this a likely, probable big change, or is this just a voice in the wilderness?
Well, at the moment it's a voice in the wilderness, but it's an official voice in the wilderness with all the panoply of publication by the EU and a whole series of recommendations to the EU. But von der Leyen's going to find it difficult because she announced the big European Green Deal, which intensified all this, and said it was their man on the moon moment. And it now turns out they can't afford the satellite and it hasn't got the energy to get it there. And so there needs to be a desperately big rethink. And German industry is really suffering. Germany, the great motor, the success story, relatively more prosperous than the rest of the EU, is in almost permanent recession at the moment. It's totally dependent for success on its automotive industry. And it hasn't done the transition to battery cars. So they are in a really, really big bind. And Draghi doesn't beat about the bush. He says that the gap with America is huge and growing all the time, and it's been particularly big, the growth rate, since 2000.
And the EU's response so far seems to have been proposing to spend an enormous amount of money, which would be following the lines of the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. Is this a realistic prospect, that there could be investment, that the European Union come together and go into the bond markets and raise billions into the trillions of euros to fund a transformation to a green economy?
This is trillions of euros where they would need quite a lot from the private sector. And yes, he is talking about another big issue of bonds. As we know, there's been an 800 billion programme of bond issuing at the EU level. The Germans are saying no more. They're saying this is far too much. And thank heavens Britain isn't part of that, because that would mean our state debt was going up at a colossal rate of knots, because we'd have to meet our part of that debt. So no, I don't think it's very realistic to get a lot of state debt. So then they will turn to try and get private debt. And he rightly is very critical of the EU. It says it doesn't have proper financial markets and financial institutions on the scale of America. The capital is in America. These projects are in Europe. They may not have a very good rate of return. It's not great odds of getting the money.
And America has reduced its carbon emissions actually by fracking more than by anything else. It hasn't moved away from using traditional carbon sources of energy.
And it hasn't put itself into a legal bind with a legally set out target. And Draghi makes that very clear. He says, you know, the EU is prisoner of its own targets. America has guidelines, and they're not nearly as onerous as the ones set for Europe. And of course, China doesn't have anything, and China is the main industrial competitor, and China is cleaning up with coal to power it.
Well, there's a wonderful irony, isn't there, that all these extremely environmental batteries going into electric cars are produced using coal-powered electricity in China, and then they come over here and we pretend it's much cleaner than using oil and gas from our own resources. One of the other...
Well, and of course, if you plug an electric car in tonight, they'll already be using all the renewable power, so they'll have to burn some more gas in a power station. So how does that help?
It doesn't seem to me to help at all. And you've also got the question of the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, this worries me particularly because this seems to me to be classic protectionism. And protectionism always has to find an excuse to justify it. Protecting an industry or protecting a target. But this will just make European economies and the UK economy less efficient, won't it? Because we will be much higher cost than anywhere else.
Yeah, it makes us all worse off. It's a tax on consumers because we will have to pay more for our products. And this is the cruel dilemma that Draghi identifies. I mean, you might sell more electric cars, problematic though they are, if you sold them at Chinese car prices. But the EU has decided it's got to put a big tariff on them. America's put an even bigger tariff on because it will completely wreck the domestic car industry otherwise much more quickly.
And the domestic car industry needs to remain on the petrol engine, essentially. And the Italians have called for a delay in the move away.
How right they are. Because the public won't go with this at the moment.
Isn't this the fundamental point, that ultimately people will not vote to be cold and poor, and that they've been lied to, really, about this? They've thought that going green was free or even economically beneficial.
That's right.
And we're now increasingly seeing, with the EU underperforming GDP per capita growth in the US now for a decade, that there is no free, low-carbon economy.
No, it's very costly, and now we're beginning to learn the cost. I mean, as we know in this country, Labour has committed us to intensification of these policies without knowing the cost, and now Miliband has had to write a letter to National Grid saying, one, how do I do this? Can I do it? And two, how much does it cost? Well, you should do all that thinking before you impose it on people. And offering people £300 an unspecified day off their bills when it's actually going to get quite a lot dearer is really bad.
And that's where there's been a lot of dishonesty in pretending that renewables are cheap, when they are only cheap if you don't account for the gas that you've got on standby for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
Exactly right. And that is their big problem. And we are paying extra taxes or levies on our bill in order to subsidise the early rounds of renewables.
Well, John, thank you very much. As always, well, the Welsh First Minister, Baroness Morgan, has said, I welcome today's funding announcement. The Welsh Government stands shoulder to shoulder with His Majesty's Government in doing all we can to support workers at Tata Steel and provide a new future for steel production in Wales. Frankly, I think that would sound better in Welsh. In a moment, we'll be looking at how the Labour Party has squandered the best economic growth in the G7 in just 2 months of being in office. Plus, do you find the word walkabout offensive?
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Janis Joplin shot to fame in 1967, but after releasing 3 albums, she was dead 3 years later at the age of 27, having overdosed on heroin.
Yes, very, very brief life, but towering influence. People like Pink in the modern day have said that she is the influence. But she was around so briefly, I guess, burned very brightly and a very troubled soul. And what we've got is A Night with Janis Joplin, the musical. And I think a lot of the problems, it's been getting very mixed reviews, and I think the problem is with this subtitle, the musical. That does it no justice at all.
Really?
It's staggering, stunning in an audience. So what we have is A Night with. It's as if she's in concert. She's sitting on the stage, she's swinging from a bottle, and she's singing and giving us little memories, thoughts on life.
I think I see where you're going, because some critics have said it's a fantastic individual performance that sits in an empty vessel of a show.
Yeah.
And you're saying that that's because the expectations of what the show is have been wrong.
Yes, I agree. And I do think that it's obviously a very loving show. There's very little reference to drugs. There's a bit of a throwaway comment. So we don't really look at the demons. What we do is we explore womanhood very powerfully, but also the blues.
How long do we have to see this?
This one it's on until September the 28th. It's on at the Peacock, which is just down by Aldwych in London.
Quite a small auditorium, actually.
No, it's a big auditorium. So the Peacock is it's a bit of a barn of a room. And again, I would say this show might be better in a slightly smaller venue, but I cannot recommend the performances highly enough.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about Tata Steel and green policies. And Roger says we need a referendum on net zero. It's crazy that Labour is going with what they believe is right. We are at the mercy of foreign countries like China for steel, who could become our enemy. Yeah, Labour did win a majority, though, so I think they're entitled to follow these policies. We just need to win elections to stop them. Les says, having been part of the oil and gas industry for well over 40 years, I find the British energy and petrochemicals industries failing at a fast rate. Faraway lands are investing heavily in petroleum, especially in West Africa. This will become the next industrial revolution within the petrochemical and pharmaceuticals and eventually manufacturing industries in general, as the UK fails because of net zero. Well, there's been more bad economic news in the build-up to the October budget. According to the ONS, economic activity stalled for the second month in a row, coming as a shock to the city, which anticipated a post-election growth spurt of 0.2%. Despite claims to the contrary, the Conservatives bequeathed Labour a strong and improving economic inheritance. The UK was the fastest-growing economy in the G7, inflation was falling and interest rates were about to be cut. Is Labour's doom and gloom rhetoric harming our economic growth even before they've got their feet under the desk? Well, I'm joined now by my panel, historian and broadcaster David Oldroyd-Bolt and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Matthew, thank you for coming in. It seems to me that if you go around saying to everybody, we're all doomed, international investors are going to believe you, and they're going to think, well, if you're all doomed, you can be doomed without my dollars coming to invest in your country.
Well, I hope you'll join me in expressing the very profound hope and wish that that isn't the case, because we're all in this together.
I agree.
I
want the economy to work.
We desperately need the economy to work, and we desperately hope that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves' strategy and Keir Starmer's strategy as Prime Minister, I think they do.
What other than saying black hole?
We have to hope that they win, because if they win, we win.
One always wants a strong economy, that is true.
The concern is that the Tories have effectively broken Britain, and we're still a great country. I'm very proud to be British.
How have we broken Britain?
Because, for example, this week we have seen the Labour government, with no alternative it seems, but to let criminals out of prison in quite substantial numbers early.
There are always alternatives. They're the government now. They make choices.
They've only been in government for 2 months,
but they make
that's
choices.
the point. And you're absolutely right to be holding this government to account. And indeed, on an issue such as the winter fuel allowance, I'm someone who voted Labour, but I think they've got this one wrong. I understand why they did it, but I think they've got it wrong. It's right we hold them to account. We can't dodge reality, Jacob. Your lot were in power for 14 years.
Right.
We're now 2 months into a new government.
And during that 14 years, we dealt with COVID, we protected the economy, we protected jobs. That led to some debt and led to some economic contraction. But the economy was growing, fastest growing economy G7, inflation back under control.
Minute growth, relatively to the past. Nothing you should be proud of.
But ahead of our competitor nations, which is the key metric.
Interest rates were unbelievably low for substantial periods of time when you were in office.
Yes,
Did you invest? Did you invest in the future of our country so that you would leave an inheritance that would lead eventually to growth? I would argue not only did you not invest, but you neglected your basic functions as government, not least on prisons, but also on health.
Spending £400 billion to protect the economy during COVID was the right thing to do. And you
were in power for much longer than a pandemic.
But you could only afford to do that because of the tough decisions made by Osborne and Cameron to make sure that the books began to balance.
If they had been investing,
after the absolute catastrophe,
I'm afraid we disagree on this.
Brown's economy.
Had instead of austerity, which I think to the extent that it was pushed on our country was a mistake, had instead of that you decided to invest in infrastructure, invest in hospitals, invest in prisons, so that people don't have to give birth in crumbling hospitals, so we don't have to allow prisoners out early, which someone on the left, someone on the right, none of us want to do.
If we'd spent all this money,
we'd be in a much stronger
position. We would
position.
have had no opportunity, no ability to pay to protect people when COVID hit.
We would have grown.
We mended the roof that the Labour Party had allowed to leak before the sun went out. What are your thoughts on this? That, you know, it is early days, but the Labour Party is going around saying we're all doomed, it's a black hole, and investors are thinking, well, why should I put any money in the UK? They are talking down Britain And we're beginning to see its consequences.
In a globalised economy with free movement of capital, it seems to be extraordinarily silly to come into government saying that the country is doomed. It always amuses me when people on the left talk about investment. What they actually mean is spending, and you can only have spending if you have the economic growth to pay for that. We haven't had... The Chancellor said we've had poor economic growth for 14 years. That's not true. We've had poor economic growth since 2008 because the recovery of this country, in common with much of the West, was built on the false economic stimuli of quantitative easing, on a vast amount of immigration, which has... I hate the use of GDP as a general figure. It should be GDP per capita because that shows that in common with most of Europe, economies have not grown. We have seen the economy growing in a general sense but not in a particular sense, such that Britain is now poorer per head of capita than every single state of the US. That should not be, either to Labour or to the Conservatives, something of which we can be remotely complacent. Now, if the economy is to grow, we have to have lower spending per head of capita, more focused spending per head of capita, and fewer regulations and taxes on business. None of this seems to be possible under Labour.
But then what would you cut?
Well, I think we would begin by saying that the vast size of the civil service needs to be looked at.
At record levels today.
At record levels, extremely well paid, with extremely good pensions, which most people in the private sector can never hope to match. So not only are they given the advantage of job security, they know that at the end of their working lives, they will be much more comfortable than the average person in the productive economy, which, after all, pays for these things. And I would say that there are whole departments which we simply do not need. I would look at DCMS to begin with, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, none of which needs a government department to look after it. They're all perfectly capable of looking after themselves.
Well, I must correct you, gentlemen, on something fairly fundamental. This whole premise that the Labour government is saying we are all doomed is simply inaccurate. No, what Starmer did, and I'm sure you listened carefully and attentively to his speech. I'm sure you did, Jacob. What he did was say he levelled with the British public. He said the Tories have got us into a terrible mess, and things are going to get worse before they get better, and we are going to take tough decisions. Now, on the winter fuel, policy, he didn't say we're doomed. He didn't. They will get worse before they get better.
He didn't say this before the election, did he? So he suddenly discovered how awful it all was before the election. No indication you get rid of the winter fuel allowance.
Have you read the OBR letter?
Oh, yes, I've seen the OBR letter.
Would you dismiss that, would you?
The OBR is a bunch of left economists. I think the OBR is a risible organisation.
Jacob, you're a highly intelligent man. How can you dismiss the Office for Budget Responsibility as a bunch of lefties? That's irresponsible for you to do so. It undermines your credibility.
How many forecasts has the OBR got right?
You tell me. How many forecasts anyone can get right?
The OBR
all they can do is do their best.
No, they don't do their best. They're useless. They have been out by billions of pounds, not just years out. Their forecasts 5 years out are worthless. They are not worth the paper they're written on. They have been out by tens of billions of pounds months before the year ends.
You'd go for the Liz Truss model, presumably, as a supporter of Liz Truss. Do you think she did a good job with the British economy? She was responsible.
I would go for politicians making decisions on the basis of their understanding of economics.
And how strong do you think the grasp of economics was of the vast majority of the cabinets which you served as part of, Jacob?
I think that George Osborne's grasp of economics saved the country after the Labour Party ruined it. Well, no, because I'm afraid we've got to go to the break. We were going to talk about Rachel Reeves getting thousands of pounds of money to pay her heating bills while stealing it from pensioners, the greedy old so-and-so. Anyway, thanks to my panel. More to come in just a moment as the Socialists are set to destroy the housing market with rent controls, pushing up prices for renters across the country. Have they learned nothing from the Soviet Union? Plus, do you recognise this woman? I don't think anyone does.
Evening, time for your weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Pretty cold out there this evening. Temperatures are going to fall further through the night. Yes, there will be a touch of frost, particularly in parts of the north in the countryside, thanks to the winds coming around this area of low pressure all the way down from the Arctic, hence why we do have the chill at the moment. There's a fair few showers still around this evening, but for many they'll tend to fade. We'll keep some going in northern Scotland, a few for the north of Northern Ireland, northern parts of Wales, northwest England, but elsewhere Elsewhere, many areas dry and clear, and the wind's easing a touch overnight, which is why those temperatures will tumble down to 4 or 5 degrees in towns and cities, but rural spots, particularly in the northern half of the UK, likely to be close to or a little bit below freezing to start Thursday. So yes, a chill in the air tomorrow morning, and there will still be showers in the air as well coming in across northern Scotland. Still a fairly brisk wind, but not as lively and not as gusty as the winds have been through the day today. Those breezes will bring a few showers across the northern parts of Northern Ireland, plenty packing in across Wales, although the south coast probably dry, and a good part of England having a dry, fine and sunny start to Thursday, albeit with that chill in the air. Now, as we go through the day, we'll see the clouds bubbling up a little bit, but I don't think we'll see as many showers as we've seen through the course of today. It's still plenty for Wales and a few more coming into southwest England and across northern Scotland, but much of southern Scotland dry, large parts of eastern England and the Midlands also staying dry and dodging the showers with some sunny spells. But despite a bit of sunshine, temperatures on the chilly side. Similar values to today, but at least the winds tomorrow will be a little lighter. Lighter still on Friday, and even again likely to see more of a frost on Friday morning. Much of the country, though, will be dry and fine on Friday. We will see rain coming into the northwest. The wind's picking up here as well. That's a sign of a change. Things turning wetter across the north into the weekend, staying dry in the south and slowly warming up.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were talking about the economy, and we've got some mail mogs that have zoomed in. Clifford says, Jacob, it's now clear that the Labour cabinet in the main are not up to the job. All Starmer wants to do is silence criticism by calling any dissent as far-right activity. I feel confident Labour will have to replace Starmer in the next 12 months. And Bridget says, Jacob, your guess blaming the Conservative government for the state of the NHS is wrong. The person that broke the NHS was Tony Blair. Starmer said all his budget was costed. Reports today suggest the government plans to restrict landlords to raising rents just once a year, and then to its definition of a market rate. Gone will be the days of in-tenancy rent increases written into contracts, a move expected to take effect by next summer. Also on the table is a ban on rental bidding wars and stricter rules requiring landlords to publish a set asking rent. The question this raises is, will these socialist interventionist reforms bring much-needed relief for tenants? Or will they drive landlords away from the market and thus damage the already squeezed rental market? Well, I'm joined now by a friend of the programme, contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. Michael, thank you for coming in. It seems to me that these reforms that were Michael Gove's reforms initially are a misplaced policy that fails to recognise that we're simply not building enough houses, and that most of these problems would evaporate if we dealt with the fundamental underlying housing shortage.
I don't think that's the case. It made me giggle a little bit in your intro. So they only get to increase rent once a year, as if you want them to increase rent every 6 months. I've dealt with a rent increase the last 4 summers, and that was more than enough for me. If it was twice a year, I think I really would lose my mind. In terms of your argument, I think you can walk and chew gum. I think ultimately we need to build a lot more homes. We haven't built enough homes since really the 60s, by the way, when we were building 100,000 council homes a year. So we do need to build more homes, but renters also need a lot more security. I think the idea that we have in this country at the moment, lots of people like myself living in private rental sector, but also lots of people raising children in the private rental sector. And at the moment, because landlords are able to sort of evict people at will, whenever they like, with a couple of months' notice, it's impossible to lay down any roots.
But I think this is the dysfunction of the overall market rather than the dysfunction of the private rented sector. That is that most people who would want to set down roots would actually like to be buying property, and they're not able to do so because prices are too high, because supply has been so heavily constrained, and that the private rented sector is actually meant to be for a short term to help facilitate mobility. And if you want to maximise the number of properties in the private rented sector, as we saw with the reforms that came in with the short holds in the late 1980s, if you want to maximise that, you want to make it a flexible market so that people enter it. And we do now see that landlords are leaving the market, which constrains supply and actually puts up rents.
But I'm a little bit confused about those two arguments, because you're saying we want to maximise the supply in the private rented sector, but we also want more homeowners. Now, if there are a number of landlords who sell up their properties because they don't like these reforms, which, by the way, I don't think will happen. These are very, very moderate reforms. These aren't rent controls, right? What we're looking at here is a system which is a lot more in line with what is the case in most of Europe. Indeed, we'll still have a more liberal system than they have in most of Europe when it comes to renting. So I don't really see how people are going to leave the market. But if landlords were to leave the market, then people would buy those homes and then be owner-occupied homes, wouldn't they?
But then you shrink the private rental sector, which pushes up prices because there are fewer properties for those who need to rent.
Well, except if someone who was in the private rental property has now bought a home. And I think this is really key, because lots of the arguments when it comes to price controls is that if you sort of have an artificially low price for a commodity, then people will produce less of it. And I think what that really misses is landlords don't produce homes. Right? If it were the case that when a landlord decided not to rent out his or her home anymore, it was just magically poofed into the air, then yes, you would have a problem. But they sell it and someone else buys it.
That's absolutely true, but the planning system does. And because we've had a consistently growing population in recent decades, we have had demand outstripping supply. And therefore, if you change the balance of supply, you have an effect within different parts of the market of a disproportionate kind. And if you want to free up the overall market, that is about increasing the total supply.
I mean, we agree on these two questions. So, I mean, I think we need to massively increase the supply of housing. I think that should be council homes. I think that should be private homes. I think that could be cooperative homes. I want a lot more houses in this country. And by the way, your party was really the worst when it came to this. Obviously, New Labour didn't build many, but it was your backbenchers who stopped planning reform happening.
I was
Labour
very pro-planning reform, and I thought the rebellion against that
But I don't really see how you think that these reforms, which is just to make living in a rental property a bit more secure, a bit more livable,
because I think they're trying to avoid the fundamental problem.
Well,
they're trying to pretend that you solve the problem,
but they're not.
by tweaking it. It was the same as taking away rent relief for landlords. You make the private rented sector less attractive, so you do increase, to your point earlier, a little bit of home ownership. But what you actually want is to increase total supply, which then, through market forces, will make landlords more responsive to their tenants, because the tenants will have more choice. And that's where the free market isn't functioning.
So I think there's two issues. I don't really see why you're opposing these. So at the moment, sort of opposing these two policies, at the moment we have a Labour Party which has done two things which the Conservatives said they would do for years and never managed because of your backbenchers. So they've introduced some degree of planning reform, and they've introduced this rental rights bill.
Yeah. On the planning reform, the devil will be in the detail. I mean, I hope they have, but they haven't yet done anything about the
But
new
if they don't do anything about it, it's not going to be anything to do with this rental rights bill. And even if we did have a massive surplus of housing that you're talking about...
But that's where I fundamentally disagree. You see, I think we are constantly looking at the symptoms of a failing housing market. And these are high rents, and they are power with landlords rather than tenants. But these are symptoms of a failure to build. And that if you get building up to meet the demand, then you change the balance for tenants against landlords, and you make private ownership easier.
So, I mean, let's look internationally at this. So one of the reasons why I'm sort of so convinced that building more homes is going to help is by looking at sort of comparable countries. So in Germany, in France, they've got loads more homes per capita, per number of people, and it's cheaper to live there. They also have a much more regulated rental market than we do. So I think counterposing some form of regulation in the private rental sector and building homes is just not borne out by the evidence anywhere. These are two separate issues which can be done in tandem.
You see it really directly in the UK. that if you look at the provision of private rented sector going back over the last 100 years, as rent reforms came in, the private rented sector shrank and shrank and shrank, and then it grew once assured shortholds came in.
But you're mixing up two things. So the private rental sector isn't a net good. I'd prefer people to either own their home or live in council homes.
No. Of course it's a net good.
But what you're talking about is owner-occupied homes being converted into private rental sector homes. If, when Margaret Thatcher introduced short-hold tenancies, there were hundreds of thousands of properties which were built to rent, I'd be happy with that. That's not what happened. What happened is landlords bought up owner-occupied homes.
But private rental properties are hugely to the good. They allow people to move easily to jobs.
You just said you want more people to own their homes.
I'm in favour of people owning their own homes, but that doesn't mean...
Every house that exists is either going to be owner-occupied or it's going to be owned by a landlord or it's going to be owned by a local government.
Just because I'm in favour of people owning their own homes doesn't mean there aren't benefits to private rented sector. People can move to where jobs are. At the beginning of their careers, they can decide that there is something that is suitable for them, that when they get married is...
So what you want is a relatively small private rental sector, a bit like what we had in the 1970s.
You want flexibility. And flexibility is not created by weighting the scales against landlords.
Well, this isn't
flexibility is by letting the market decide.
So again, let's look at the evidence. So what we both want is a lot more homes being built, right? We're on the same page there.
Yes.
Now, what happened in the 1980s? So Margaret Thatcher introduced a bunch of liberalising reforms, which she said would lead to lots more homes being produced. So privatising the council home stock and massively liberalising the rental market. So before that, you had rent controls, you also had long-term rental contracts. She massively liberalised it. And yes, you got more landlords buying up houses that already existed. You didn't get extra homes being built.
You also got a steady number of houses being built.
But it was lower than before. Hold on. A steadily low number of houses being built.
The big change comes from 1997 with mass migration, when you go from the tens of thousands a year
so again,
to
you're mixing up, you're mixing up two things, though.
We're
talking about supply
we're going to have and I'm talking about demand. Supply and demand, the key to economics. But sadly, Michael, I'm going to have to cut you off. I am sorry. This is such an interesting conversation. We'll come back to it, no doubt. In a moment, we'll be discussing how offensive the word walkabout is in light of Buckingham Palace's decision not to use it during the King's visit to Australia. And does this lady look familiar to you?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Did you know several Paralympic GB track and field athletes are aiming to go for gold this summer in Paris? So aside from pure talent, a British firm has incorporated, get this, space technology in the materials of running clothes to help athletes perform at their ultimate capacity. I'm not sure if I believe this, but we'll find out in a sec. Trailblazing scientists, engineers and designers at British firm Rion Labs have taken an idea first used in a NASA project, and they've now developed it for over 15 years at Imperial College in London.
First of all, please can you explain to us a bit more about how and what this incredible technology is?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, our founder, Dr. Dan Plant, spent many years developing these kind of dynamic materials. That means they behave in what's called non-Newtonic way. So they don't follow the rules. Effectively, they can change their behavior depending on kind of stress or stretch you apply to it. So what you get on an athlete level, if you imagine you have a garment, it's supercharged. It's such that the garment changes its support depending on your movement or your activity or the speed at which you run.
So you're saying that it generates, what, more sort of kinetic energy, is that right?
Not quite. It makes you effectively make more out of your own energy. Spot the athletes with the wavy curves and stripes, you'll see that. So that's super polymer we have in combination with these stripes that are kind of built around the way your muscles moves.
You said the difference between first and fourth place is a fraction of a percent.
Yeah, that's the main difference it makes. So even if you manage to kind of make more of your own energy and improve your performance by 1%, that's the difference between podium and non-podium.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about rent controls, and Peter says what we need is fewer people, not more homes. And Ken is preempting our next discussion about the statue, and he says it's Dot Cotton from EastEnders with Doctor Who behind her for some totally inexplicable reason. Now, do be careful. We're going to use some foul language in this section, apparently. An innocuous word to most of us, but walkabout is apparently so offensive that it has caused Buckingham Palace to drop it from His Majesty's first visit to Australia as sovereign. Normally, His Majesty would engage in walkabouts to meet his subjects in Australia. However, apparently in Aboriginal culture, the term refers to people going into the bush in times of grief or meditation, and so the term is to be replaced with the phrase, opportunity to meet the public. Is this another case of hypersensitivity gone mad? Well, my brilliant panel is still with me, the historian broadcaster David Aldroyd-Bolt and the political commentator Matthew Sadlin. David, you haven't swooned, you haven't reached for the smelling salts when I said the word walkabout.
Well, you see, I happen to have lived in Clapham and therefore been to the Australian bars called the walkabout bars, and unless they're going to be changed en masse, I think this is a case of what the great late Australian commentator and journalist Clive James called cultural cringe. If you look further into the definition of a walkabout in Aboriginal culture, it refers generally to ritual. And I should have thought that the Crown, the sovereign, going to meet the people of one of his realms is a form of ritual. And therefore it is, on those grounds, definitional grounds, perfectly fine. And moreover, I haven't heard any Aboriginal voices coming out against this and saying that they're deeply offended by it and that the King should be ashamed of using this term. So it seems to me an absolute confection of outrage.
You're saying that the Telegraph hasn't quoted Aboriginal voices? Goodness me, knock me down with
Nor
a feather.
indeed the Independent.
I have to say, you two, I mean, you do sound rather hypersensitive yourselves about this. You seem to take a great offence at the idea that Aboriginal people in Australia, which is, by the way, quite a long way away from here, have taken offence.
I just think it's very funny that somebody should take offence at the word walkabout.
But what would you do if you were in His Majesty the King's private office?
I'm not criticising King. I'm just wondering about whether the sensitivity should be taken seriously.
Criticising?
I'm interested that this has arisen as a subject, that walkabout could conceivably be, because I imagine the Aboriginal for walkabout is not walkabout. It's a translation in the first place, and you could say that instead of translating it to a walkabout, you could translate it as opportunity to meet the public.
I just think it's quite funny that sometimes those who blame others for taking offence are actually taking great offence themselves.
But we're not.
No, I should have been very surprised if it were, in fact, Aboriginal people in Australia who had said that they were offended by this. I think this will be an instance of somebody in either the private office or in either the Australian or British government suggesting that this might be a term to which somebody could, in a hypothetical sense, take offence and therefore shouldn't be used.
So you're not saying the King has gone woke, then? You're not accusing
No, I should never accuse His Majesty of such a thing.
I doubt the King has made this decision personally. But let's move on to a statue commissioned to commemorate 2 years since the death of Queen Elizabeth II, which was unveiled in Northern Ireland last week. But the grand event was marred by claims from angry locals that it looks absolutely nothing like her. The bronze sculpture, which is meant to depict Her late Majesty beside Prince Philip and 2 of her corgis, attempts to reflect her grace, steadfastness and lifelong dedication. But does the statue do her justice? Well, my panel is still with me. Is this something we can agree on? I mean, it is not great, is it?
I have to say the first thing that I noticed was the headscarf. And that I thought was a very attractive symbol of our late, great Queen. So I don't mind that at all. Does it look particularly like Her Majesty? Probably not. Do I feel a little bit of sympathy for the creator of this?
Yeah.
Yes, because, I mean, you imagine the hard work that goes into it.
That's why I don't want to be too mean about it, because I do have a certain sympathy for somebody who's worked hard to do something
And art is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it, Jake?
Not if it's meant to look like somebody. No, this isn't some piece of abstract art. This is meant to look like the Queen. I don't know. David, do you think it looks like Dot Cotton?
No, to me it bears more than a passing resemblance to Patricia Routledge, who played Hyacinth Bouquet in Keeping Up Appearances. I think it's a perfect encapsulation of that great actress, but I'm afraid not a particularly good artistic rendering of Her Late Majesty. And I think the late Duke of Edinburgh there looks rather like Gary Cooper, which is probably something to which he wouldn't have objected too much. What struck me is that the artist seems never to have seen clothes before, because both the Queen's and the Duke of Edinburgh's clothes are buttoning up the wrong way for their sex.
On a serious note, my wife pointed out to me just a couple of days ago that it is now 2 years since the Queen passed away.
Yes,
I remember that evening very well.
Yes,
it was one of those you remember where you were moments, and in fact my wife that evening was in tears because she had this capacity, the Queen, to touch us as her subjects.
I completely agree.
In fact, just the other day, I was looking through a video on my phone of my now late father, who died a year ago, in which he recounted to us what the Queen had said to him when he was knighted, and she was really on it. She was a deeply impressive person.
She was an absolutely wonderful person. Now, a story that will warm the hearts of Christians across the world. The much-revered St. Teresa of Avila has been exhumed in her home country of Spain to be discovered as incorrupt and perfectly preserved nearly 450 years after her death, in what scientists are describing as an archaeological miracle. St. Teresa of Avila, a 16th century Spanish Carmelite nun and renowned mystic, was canonised in 1622 for her theological contribution to prayer and the shaping of the Church. She was very important in the Counter-Reformation. She joins a divine array of around 100 saints whose bodies were found to be incorrupt, including St. Bernadette of Lourdes, St. Anthony of Padua, who's very helpful if you lose things, Padre Pio, St. Vincent de Paul, St. John Bosco, Pope Pius IX, Pio Nono, great man, proper conservative, and, of course, our last Anglo-Saxon king, Edward the Confessor, whose body was found to be incorrupt by Henry II just under 100 years after he had died. Dear Father, you have given the saints in heaven eternal happiness, and they now live in the fullness of your glory. Thank you for the gift of their friendship and the witness of their holy lives. Thank you also to my panel and their witness to holy lives, which they're gearing up on. Up next is Patrick Christie's. Patrick, have you got a holy life coming up for us later?
Oh, well, I certainly hope so, Jacob. A fantastic end to the show, that. So, I'm going to be talking about why are we not allowed to know how many migrants are on benefits, why are we not allowed to know how many commit crimes, why are we not allowed to know how much it's costing us to put them up in accommodation. It's almost like it's being hidden from us, isn't it? The illegal migrant charities, as well, that are on the other side of the border there in Calais, I'm asking whether or not they're human traffickers in disguise. Are they aiding and abetting that trade in people? Labour MPs, two of them who want to be on the board for women and equalities, don't know what a woman is, which is quite laughable. And also Labour MPs as well have claimed £400,000 in expenses for their energy bills, a lot of that in their second homes, but of course they're cutting it for the elderly.
Yeah, typically mean socialists. Well, that'll be very exciting, Patrick. Now, that's all coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock, as you know, and you remember that I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. If you've forgotten, you may have been listening to the wrong programme. But I do want to tell you about the Somerset cricket, because we're hoping for good weather in Taunton tomorrow. Tom Banton is 28 not out, batting with a bad ankle. He went out number 11, having scored a century in the first innings. And Michael Vaughan's son, Archie, took 6 wickets for 102 to bowl Surrey out. It's a really close, exciting match. Somerset could win the championship if we win here. Eyes on Taunton tomorrow. Let's hope the sun will be shining.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, time for your weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Pretty cold out there this evening. Temperatures going to fall further through the night. Yes, there will be a touch of frost, particularly in parts of the north in the countryside, thanks to the winds coming around this area of low pressure all the way down from the Arctic, hence why we do have the chill at the moment. There's a fair few showers still around this evening, but for many they'll tend to fade. We'll keep some going in northern Scotland, a few for the north of Northern Ireland, northern parts of Wales, northwest England, but elsewhere Elsewhere, many areas dry and clear, and the wind's easing a touch overnight, which is why those temperatures will tumble down to 4 or 5 degrees in towns and cities, but rural spots, particularly in the northern half of the UK, likely to be close to or a little bit below freezing to start Thursday. So yes, a chill in the air tomorrow morning, and there will still be showers in the air as well coming in across northern Scotland. Still a fairly brisk wind, but not as lively and not as gusty as the winds have been through the day today. Those breezes will bring a few showers across the northern parts of Northern Ireland, plenty packing in across Wales, although the south coast probably dry, and a good part of England having a dry, fine and sunny start to Thursday, albeit with that chill in the air. Now, as we go through the day, we'll see the clouds bubbling up a little bit, but I don't think we'll see as many showers as we've seen through the course of today. It's still plenty for Wales and a few more coming into southwest England and across northern Scotland, but much of southern Scotland dry, and large parts of eastern England and the Midlands also staying dry and dodging the showers with some sunny spells. But despite a bit of sunshine, temperatures on the chilly side. Similar values to today, but at least the winds tomorrow will be a little lighter. Lighter still on Friday, and even again likely to see more of a frost on Friday morning. Much of the country, though, will be dry and fine on Friday. We will see rain coming into the northwest. The wind's picking up here as well. That's a sign of a change. Things turning wetter across the north into the weekend, staying dry in the south and slowly warming up.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible...
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christie's. Tonight,
we see the lefty lawyers, we see the Labour Party all together.